I've always been something of a ladies' man. Ever since my first girlfriend, I've been a firm believer in the love 'em and leave 'em school of thought. In high school, it caused some trouble. I was a handsome football player who went through women like water, and it seemed I was always in the middle of some drama between a couple of gals. In a way, I guess I fed off of it, loving the attention that I got from being at the center of the controversy. As I got older, I found similar conquests out in the real world. The car lot I worked at held a bevy of pretty clients, pretty secretaries, and lovely bosses who became far less authoritarian once the bedroom door was shut. Until today, it had never really gotten me more than a drink thrown in my face, or a need to change my locks and notify security at my condo. That was before I met Maria, though. It happened a few weeks ago. I was drinking at the bar, warming up a pretty blonde on the stool next to me, when she walked in and grabbed the eye of every man there. She took a seat, long legs moving beneath her red dress, mane of black hair falling over her shoulder, and I felt drawn to her somehow. The blonde barely seemed to notice when I left her, almost like she too was taken with this bewitching creature who had wandered into our lives. She smiled at me as I approached, asking what she was drinking as the collective eyes of the crowd fell away from us. She said her name was Maria, and for 2 months I was putty in her hands. She was unlike anyone I had ever met. Smart, confident, possessed of her own upward mobility, and didn't seem to need me in the least. When we made love, it was incredible, like nothing I had ever experienced. That was the first time I thought about just staying with her forever, lying there with her, basking in the afterglow. I began to feel that I could hang up my bachelor life for good. After the third time, I started to get a little scared by this feeling. This had always been my life. I had always been a dog chasing my next bone, and this woman was making me feel things I had never felt before. I began to pull away hard. I soon fell back into my old habits. I started to tomcat around and live the life as I had before Maria. A week before Christmas, she met me in front of my apartment and confronted me. I had been out with someone else. She could probably smell her perfume on my coat, and when she tried to throw that fact in my face, I ended it. I told her it was over. It had been fun, but it was over. She didn't cry. I guess I had expected she would. Instead, she got mad. She slapped me across the face, her red nails cutting my cheek, and I could see some of it dripping from them as she seethed at me. For a moment, her beauty slipped, and she looked more like a wild animal who'd been cornered by a predator. She was furious as she stood before me, and I found myself a little afraid she would simply put an end to me right there. For a moment, she seemed to consider that very thing. "You will pay for this. No one leaves me. You will regret this. You will beg me to take you back before the end. You're crazy. We're through. You have no power over me," I told her. She smiled, and it was an ugly thing on her pretty face. "Is that what you think, mi amor? You will soon find that my reach stretches farther than even you would believe." She was right, I suppose. For the next few days, I seemed to see her everywhere and nowhere. When I was at the bar, at the club, in a hotel lobby, or wherever I was finding new and exciting places to pick up women, I would suddenly feel her close by. I would catch her mane of raven hair from the corner of my eye. I would feel her emerald eyes on the back of my head. I would hear her laugh skate across my psyche, and it would throw me off my game. I was suddenly tripping over my lines, less smooth with my pickups, and I found myself going home more and more often by myself. She seemed to haunt me, dogging my heels wherever I went, and I seemed incapable of returning to the life I had known before. I was returning to my apartment, alone one night, when I saw a package sitting in front of the door. It was December 22nd, 2 days before Christmas, and the sight of a package wrapped in deep red paper, topped with a glossy bow, wasn't really that odd. Someone had seen fit to leave me a present, but who, I wondered? I had no family, no friends to speak of, no girlfriend who might come to give me a gift. I lifted the package and shook it, hearing something heavy thunk around inside. It didn't tick, and it didn't smell like a bomb, so maybe it wasn't a vengeful ex-present. I opened the door and brought it inside with me. I sat it on the kitchen table and went to get a shower. My prospects tonight had thrown a drink at me after my line had landed badly, helped in part by Maria seeming to appear in the mirror behind the bar. She had favored sugary drinks, it appeared, and now I was sticky and in sad need of a shower. I threw my clothes in the hamper and switched on the water as I stepped into the building's steam bank. The warmth took me away from my failure, ripped the megrims from my mind, and plunged me into a blissful numbness as the water cascaded over me. I opened my eyes when I heard the soft sound from the living room, but shrugged it off as the heat coming on. I stood under the warm water, letting the stickiness and the burning pockets of alcohol drip to the floor of the plastic tub. I leaned into the deluge, letting it wash away my cares, wishing there was someone to wash my back for me. Some bouncy young thing, her charms on full display, sliding her soft hands over my tense back would be nice right about now. I could almost feel it as I stood there, her strong hands rubbing against my tired skin, her gentle fingers sliding over the knots, her jagged fingernails cutting my skin. I gasped as a searing pain ripped across my left shoulder. I staggered against the wall, feeling the blood run down my back, and realizing it hadn't been my imagination. I put a hand on the wound, my fingers coming away red, and turned my shoulder to the water as I looked around for the source of the cut. My shoulder erupted in white-hot pain as the hot water hit it, but I was more concerned about what I had scraped it against. I looked at the shower curtain, but it was free of anything that could have cut me. I looked at the opposite wall, anything that might be hanging from the ceiling, but I saw nothing. The blood running down the drain, however, said clearly that something had gotten me. Looking in the mirror after I'd gotten out and dried off, I could see 3 long scratches down my shoulder. They looked like nail marks, maybe from an angry or passionate lover, but I shrugged that off at once. I hadn't had a woman since Maria had left. The idea that they could be that old was laughable. The longer I looked at them, though, I came to realize that there had been scratches there not too long ago. Wasn't that the spot that Maria had often clutched with her nails when we were getting heavy? How many times had I looked at scratches just like these, though not as deep, in the mirror the next morning? I shrugged it off and pulled my robe on gingerly. It was a coincidence, nothing more. Maria was on my mind, so of course I was making connections where there were none. I let the warm robe envelop me and went into the living room to see what was in the box. Now that I was less sticky, my curiosity was piqued. When I got into the living room, though, I found the box on its side and opened on the floor. Somehow the box had fallen off the table, and the bow had come undone in the fall, spilling the contents out of sight. I started looking around for what had been inside. The box had been heavy enough to make me believe that the contents were pretty big, but I couldn't find anything. Nothing had rolled under the couch, nothing under the table in the kitchen, nothing in the kitchen itself, and nothing was out of place at all. Had someone come in and stolen whatever was inside? No, I thought after a moment of frantic looking, because the chain was on. No one could have gotten in if the chain was on and unbroken. I did find a card that had been inside, though. A little red card with black writing that made me feel squirmy as I read it, and I thought about Maria again. Merry Christmas, mi amor. May this gift remind you that my reach is farther than you think. It wasn't signed. I balled it up and threw it away. Someone was playing games. An ex, probably. I had many. Most of them were dumb as rocks, and again, that made me think of Maria. This was the sort of thing that she would think was funny, the kind of thing she might think would scare me. Maybe scare me enough to bring me back to her. I turned off the light and went to bed. I lay in bed with my head under the pillow, but sleep seemed to elude me. The scratches on my back burned, throbbing against the covers, and I couldn't help but think about Maria as I lay there. She was never far from my mind these days, since I kept seeing her out of the corner of my eye, or she seemed to loom just over my shoulder. Now this mysterious gift. What did it all mean? May this gift remind you that my reach is farther than you might think. What the hell did that even mean? As I lay there, I began to hear a strange noise from the living room again. I heard something moving around in the quiet of the night, a soft scuttling like a rat or a mouse. I had never had a rodent problem. I was a pretty clean bachelor, all things considered. It was cold, and they were always looking for a warm place to hide, though. I made a note to call the landlord tomorrow so the exterminator could come out, and tried to get some sleep. Now, however, it was the scrabbling that kept me awake. I could hear the rodent in my living room, moving around and exploring my nice clean apartment, and the sound of its little feet was driving me crazy. I could swear it didn't sound like a normal rat. The cadence of its footfalls was off or something, and it just seemed to crawl into my ear as I lay awake. It sounded big, though, that was for sure. I made a note to myself to call the landlord right away in the morning. I did not want this thing making a nest in my house and staying any longer than it had to. When it turned its attention to the hallway, I sat up to make sure I had closed the door. I didn't figure it could get in with the door closed, and I laid down as I tried to get some sleep and ignore the annoying beastie. It would hit the door and go away, hopefully not nesting too deep in my apartment so the exterminator couldn't find it easily. The last thing I wanted was a whole family of rodents in my apartment, chewing up my furniture and leaving droppings on mine. When the door creaked open, I nearly jumped out of my skin. How would it open the door? Had I forgotten to close it firmly? Was the rat big enough to brood its way through it? I heard the little bastard wandering in and hunkered under the covers. Okay, so he was in here. It's not like he could climb into bed with me. I was a big dumb predator, and he wouldn't want to get too close. Rats only came and chewed people's faces off in movies or tabloids. In reality, they were cowards who barely ever bothered people beyond invading their houses and being a nuisance. It would crawl into my closet and probably chew on some of my dirty clothes I had on the floor, and that would be... I felt a tug on the comforter and shuddered as it pulled its way into my bed. I laid as still as I could, the weight of the thing pressing down on me. It was bigger than I had thought it was, its weight making me think of a kitten almost, and it definitely had more than 4 legs. It scrabbled over my leg, up to my buttocks, and over my back as it made a beeline for my head. This was insane. There should be no reason for it to get this close. Rats did not usually get this close to people. I began to remember these old stories about rats eating homeless people's faces, the victims waking up and screaming as the rat made off with their lips or a nose. Would he come under the covers to look for me? Did I want to give him that chance? I sat up suddenly as it scuttled over my injured shoulder, tossing back the covers and roaring at it like a pissed-off lion. I expected that it would send the little bastard running. It would piss itself all the way to the front door, not expecting a screaming human to be waiting for it. The little asshole had messed with the wrong guy today, and he was going to get more than he bargained for tonight. At the time, my only regret was that I would have to wash the comforter and sleep under an old quilt in my closet when it peed all over itself in fear. I wish that was the limit of my regrets that night. It turned out that it wasn't a rat, and my angry cry turned into a confused scream as quickly as it had started. It had danced back, crouched on the corner of my bed, as the light through the window showed me precisely what had been scrabbling through my house. As my scream died in my throat, we sat and stared at each other, another scream bubbling up my throat as it assessed me from its position of surprise. It was no rat, no mouse either. It was a hand. It looked just like Thing from the Addams Family. The hand was pink, slightly tanned, its knuckles hairy, and the back near the wrist was covered in coarse black hair. It hunkered on the bed, seeming to look at me, and when I screamed again, it lunged suddenly. My screams were cut off as the hand clamped around my windpipe, and I yanked at the wrist stump as I tried to free it. The fingers dug in, pressing into my flesh, and its grip was as strong as iron. Strong or not, it lacked the leverage that a wrist provides, and I soon felt the fingers sliding off my skin as I threw it against the door. It hit the door with a splat, and one of my neighbors yelled at me to keep it down. It rose to its finger legs and seemed to be trying to get its bearings. I had stunned it, and I could see the pointer finger was bent a little after hitting the door. I had to strike now before it got its wits about it, and I scrambled my own hand along the edge of my bed, hunting for the baseball bat I had there. I felt the cold metal of the bat as it came scuttling at me again, and I wrapped my hands around the handle, gaining confidence as I lifted it. It jumped this time, its finger legs bringing it up onto the bed as it prepared to lunge at me again. I waited, not wanting to spook it. It tested its fingers a single time before it sprang at my throat again, looking ghostly in the moonlight as it leapt. I swatted it deftly out of the air, and when it hit the wall, I saw it twitch as its fingers stood at odd angles. I didn't wait for it to get itself together this time. I rolled out of bed, deft as any hunting cat, and swung the bat down on it as it lay twitching. I saw it spasm, blood oozing from the strange thing, but I kept swinging until it was little more than a pulpy flesh wad on the ground. Its blood was black as moonlight, sitting on the carpet like sludge as it clung to the bat like ichor. I was winded when I stopped swinging, and the thing was little more than a pile of meat and bones. I grabbed a gray grocery bag from the nightstand and picked up the pulpy mess. I didn't want it in my room. I didn't want it in my apartment, and I intended to walk straight out to the dumpster despite the hour and throw it away. I would sleep much better once it was gone, and I was suddenly very tired. The adrenaline was keeping me upright, but once it left, the dread and the exertion would lay me out. I opened the door to my room and took a step out into the hallway. I froze, however, as 3 more of the hands came wheeling around the corner, making a beeline for my open door. I slammed it on their non-existent faces, putting my back against it as they banged and smashed. That's where I've been for the last 3 hours. The sun is peeking up now, and the bag sitting beside me has stopped moving. The hands outside are still moving outside the door, though. I can see them if I peek under the door, and my phone's been blowing up with texts for the last 2 hours. They're from her. They're all from Maria. She's been texting me ever since I made the phone call. I had picked up the phone and dialed emergency services at once. How had I not thought of that before? The cops would come in and find the hands, and that would be that. They would kill them or bring this nightmare to an end somehow. I lifted the phone to my head with shaking hands, and when the operator answered, I almost cried. Yes, I need the police here immediately. I have strange creatures in my house that have trapped me in my bedroom. They're trying to hurt me. I need help. Okay, sir, 1 moment, please. She asked for my address, verified my name, and then began to ask me other things while I waited for the police to arrive. How long had this been going on? What sort of creatures were they? Was I injured? I told her I wasn't hurt, not really, and that I wasn't sure what they were. I couldn't exactly tell her there were disembodied hands in my house. She would think I was crazy, so I lied. Yes, you do, she said, her voice sounding familiar the longer I talked to her. Why don't you tell me what's in your house, mi amor? Maria, I breathed, my breath catching in my throat. Why don't you give up and come back to me? I'll let you crawl back, and we'll put this behind us. You don't want to know what happened to the ones who decided not to come back to me. She cackled evilly on the other end of the phone. I hung up and threw it under my bed, where it continued to ring. I heard it ring again and again, the hand slamming into the door, until she finally gave up and started texting me. I heard it chirp 12 times, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, before I finally dug it out and started writing this. She kept texting, sending me messages, telling me to give up and just come back to her. I kept swiping them away, trying to ignore them, and 30 minutes ago, she sent her last text so far. See you soon. The hands have stopped banging now, and I can see a pair of shoes standing on the other side of my bedroom door. Someone just knocked, calling my name and telling me to open the door. It appears that Maria has arrived. It appears that I'm out of time. It appears I should have been more wary of my exes bearing gifts. It appears her reach was, indeed, farther than even I believed. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you enjoyed tonight's story and you haven't already, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. While you're here, maybe go ahead and give that video a like and drop a comment. I like it when people comment. If you're not too spooked and you think you might can handle a little more, why not go ahead and click on one of those other videos that's about to pop up. Maybe check out one of our playlists. There's quite a few. If you'd like to support the channel more monetarily, I'd suggest maybe you go pick up a copy of my latest book. There's a link below. Or maybe head on over to Patreon. I have quite a few tiers. I'm sure there's one that'll suit you best. Speaking of Patreon, let's go ahead and thank our patrons, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Winters, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you're a fan of my books, I always recommend go ahead and join that Ghostly Reader tier, $10 a month, and it also gets you a book anytime I write one, which is around twice a year usually. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.